So, hello, I'm David. I think some of you follow me online. I think some of you have already read some of my books as well. This is quite an intense experience actually, since the first time my mum's been at one of these things. And trust me when I tell you this is quite the transformation for my mum to see, because she was there through my years of addiction and psychosis. She was there when I was diagnosed autistic, ADHD, schizophrenic. She's really been my rock my whole life, so thank you, Mum.
Big up, Mum.
Big up, Mum.
So, yeah, I wrote this new book, A Guide to Autism and Psychosis, Personal and Professional Insights from a Psychotic Mind. And there's chapters in there with statistics and the fact that we're more likely to experience psychosis. There's ideas around the community knowledge of perhaps why we experience psychosis. But I decided to read the chapter, What is it like to be schizophrenic? Because research, knowledge production, if it's without lived experience, it's the one-eyed man in the land of the blind. You can't have science without the lived experience when it comes to human experiences. And so I wanted to read you this. It's a brief chapter. A lot of the chapters are brief. I tend to be quite brief. It's a tricky subject, I think, because I come at mental health from what could be considered quite a radical position. I don't really see it as an illness. I very much see it as acquired neurodivergence. The society we live in does things to us that changes the way our brain works, and in that sense our mental health is more a function of the environment and relationships we experience than it is anything wrong with us. And I, as a schizophrenic person, personally do not see myself as broken or unwell. I see myself as having a very logical reaction to very difficult circumstances. So this is What is it like to be schizophrenic? I've explored in great detail how I don't view my being schizophrenic as an illness. This in itself seems like a bold claim, given the way that society has pathologized anyone who, by means of their body-mind, cannot perform neuronormativity. Neurotypicality has been set as a standard for how one should embody themselves, with everything outside of it being viewed as illness. This despite the fact that neurotypicality is not a neurocognitive style in its own right. Walker positions neurotypicality as a performance dictated by the neuronormative standards of its relevant culture. What I feel is necessary is to position my schizophrenic body-mind within the experiences that it creates. It is also important at this point to note how one's environment plays a role in the generation and sustenance of those experiences. I cannot actually point to a single schizophrenic experience, if such a thing exists in such explicit terms, that was not triggered by the affordances of my environment. Schizophrenia, for me, is a neurodivergence I acquired through years of trauma and abuse. Some neurodivergence is born into us, some we create through intentional practice. Schizophrenic is what I became through the adverse events that altered my cognition. Schizophrenia is strange. Much like my autism, it is not a separate entity to myself awaiting removal. At times it does feel like an organism that is hijacking your thoughts and senses. When I am well, it is just the way I am. At times, you are certain it's trying to kill you. Despite the individual diagnosis, I cannot separate my schizophrenia from my autism any more than I can my ADHD. The three create their own unique neurocognitive style that is distinct from any singular part of the neurological equation. I live my life with a certain level of paranoia. My mind is one that will assume people intend to harm me. I am often somewhat concerned with non-existent conspiracies that centre around others meaning to harm me. For the most part, I can look past it. 99% of the time, these are fleeting thoughts. Occasionally, they will take hold, creating anxiety and fear that I often mask. It is rarely perceptible to others, or even of note in its effect on my outward behaviour. Most only know that I am schizophrenic because I have told them so. I have largely learned to coexist with myself. Perhaps more distressing are hallucinations. When the episodic nature of my schizophrenia is ramping up, I can hear multiple voices. Often these voices will stoke the fires of paranoia. They not only talk directly to me, but also to each other. At my worst, I live with a constant and derogatory commentary that will not interact with me. When I hear these voices, they sound as real as talking to a friend in person. Usually they are disembodied. Sometimes they emanate from electronic devices. They are more tangible than thoughts. I hear them as literal sounds. They are as real to me as the music coming from my computer while I type this. I have visual hallucinations that look as real as you or I. I see things that defy description in any language I have access to. Reality during an episode can become somewhat of an abstraction. I have lost count of the number of times I have handed a person an object only to find it on the floor some hours later, the person a manifestation of my subconscious. Perhaps most frustrating is that at the very height of an episode, I can lose control of my speech. My mind will race so fast and jump from topic to topic in a way that I cannot verbally communicate. It is perhaps the scarier of the traits. It feels like I'm communicating fine, but all people hear is gibberish. It's as though you are speaking an unknown language in a foreign land. The final aspect I would like to consider is delusions. This is the culmination of all the experiences that alter my beliefs about the world around me. Delusions are the sum of my other schizophrenia traits. The world, I believe in, feels 100% real. No amount of evidence or discussion can shift these beliefs. If anything, I cling to them more so. If I can't find evidence to confirm my delusions, my brain makes it materialise. I draw connecting lines between things that are not even compatible. At this point, all evidence to the contrary is pointless. My body-mind will only believe its own interpretation of the world. Despite these terrifying experiences, I coexist with this aspect of my body-mind. I have come to learn a great deal about who I am and what my desires are through the way that my mind alters reality. I have come to understand that my psychosis is protective. When reality is too much, my mind creates a more acceptable reality, or at least one that I can understand more easily. Psychosis has become an introspective journey on my path to neuroqueer practice. I allow my shifting reality to guide me through different possibilities and consider aspects that many would not even know exist. I am at peace with who I am. I have come to realise that the people who fear me for being schizophrenic are victims of a system that has positioned people like me as dangerous. The truth is, I am at greater risk to myself than any other person. And I quote, about 280,000 people are currently being treated for schizophrenia in the UK. Of these, about 10% will die by their own hand within 10 years of their diagnosis. With an annual death toll of 800 to 1,800 in the UK alone, suicide is a major cause of premature death amongst people with schizophrenia and on par with road deaths. I want others who are schizophrenic or experience psychosis to know that I see them. I know the isolation that our minds can create. I know how it feels to have to question your thoughts constantly, to wonder what is real and what your mind has generated. I want you to know that even at your most lonely, there are others out there who get it. We know, we care. The world is brighter for having diversity in it, and we are part of that diversity. We do not have to view ourselves as broken and hopeless in order to have our struggle validated. Rather, we should not have to. Neurodivergence is having a body-mind at odds with the status quo. My body-mind has become the site of manifestation for a systemic violence that seeks to silence it. I will not be silent about my existence. I will not be ashamed of my madness or neurodivergence. I am proud of who I am, and I will not allow the world to steal that from me the way it did my sanity.
Wow.
I don't know if anyone has any questions, but I'm happy to answer some. Yes, Owen.
No, it's hard.
If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer some questions. Otherwise, I have books for sale. Obviously, the one I just read from is the one I've got the most of. I do have some copies of my other books, such as Unusual Medicine, which looks at my experience with drug addiction and substance use. I've got The New Normal, which is really my very long rant about how broken society is. And I've got stuff about CAMs and their failure to support autistic people and things like that. So, hello.
Can we have a moment to appreciate how nice your books feel?
Thank you. I very intentionally choose a matte cover for my books because I like the way it feels.
Me too.
I think it's like quintessentially neurodivergent that I choose book covers based on their texture. But yeah, actually the one you just showed me, that one's a bit different. It's a poetry collection because I do that sometimes as well. But yeah, I don't know, has anyone got any questions or hello?
Can you just remind me the way that, because I've heard you talk about it in the past, the way that you describe the term body mind?
Okay,
I know
so
that I've heard you do it before, but I'm just trying to.
I first came across the term body mind through the work of Dr. Nick Walker. She is a trans somatic psychologist living in California. She actually is the person who conceptualized neuroqueer theory, and I've had the pleasure of writing a chapter for a textbook she's putting together on the subject. But she introduced me to the concept of the body mind, which was not her concept, but comes from further back, which is this acknowledgement that your brain and nervous system can't be separated from the rest of your body. So in the sense, it's considered by a certain group, including myself, that describing ourselves as body minds is perhaps more inclusive and accurate, because what happens to any part of the body affects both body and mind to an extent. Body mind is really is a holistic way of referring to the way we exist, rather than trying to separate us out into individual body systems. Hello.
What's helped you most with the psychosis? I ask you because my son's struggling at the moment, and I just would like to find some direction of how to support him.
It's been a challenge, and considering, I have very strong feelings about viewing mental health issues as illness, some might find it strange that one of the most helpful things for me has actually been medication. Now, don't get me wrong, medication has done terrible things to my body. I gained a lot of weight, I developed diabetes, I've had cardiac arrhythmias, I've had what they call extrapyramidal symptoms, where parts of my body became contorted and spasmed. They're really not nice medicines, but I have found them to be somewhat of a miracle for the way they made my life livable. I also had a couple of very good therapists, which I know can be a challenge in the UK. A lot of autistic people don't have good experiences of therapy, but I've had a couple of good therapists who are willing to step outside the bog standard CBT that research has shown doesn't actually do an awful lot for autistic people. I think the things that have helped was medication kind of brought the symptoms down to a livable place. I was able to differentiate between hallucinations and delusions and reality, but also having therapy that helped me look at how traumas I've experienced in my life contributed to the way my mind works now. What was nice about that sort of trauma-based approach was that it didn't look at me as there is something wrong with you. It wasn't what's wrong with you, it's what happened to you. And I found that so much more helpful than feeling like I was some kind of medical patient who just needed to be experimented on until he was fixed.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, I've got another question. I hope it's all right. It's when you, in relation to visual and auditory hallucinations. Just a very small bit about myself is I'm completely aphantasic. So I can't visualise, I have no mind's eye. I can play back songs like it's on the radio, and occasionally I'll have auditory flashbacks. What I'm curious about is if someone has psychotic episodes, do you have any knowledge as to somebody that may be on the aphantasic spectrum, like towards the more severe end? Do you know much about how that might?
It's interesting because I know that with psychosis, people who have sensory differences and things like that, their experience of psychosis takes different forms. So people who communicate in sign language, I've heard of them hallucinating hands doing sign language rather than hearing voices. And so I think, whilst I can't speak specifically to how aphantasia might play out in psychosis itself, what I will say is that the brain is very clever at finding ways of doing these things. And I'm also very aware that when you look at the research, a lot of what we experience on a day-to-day basis is actually a hallucination. So for example, in our vision, we have a big blind spot in the middle, and our brain fills it in for us based on the information it's getting from the outside. So a lot of the things we experience on a day-to-day basis are our brain's best guess rather than what necessarily 100%.
That's what magenta is.
Yeah, so our brains are very clever at filling in the gaps. So I don't know if being aphantasic would, for example, impact on visual hallucinations, because for me, they are a visual experience rather than a mind's eye experience. But I could imagine that it could change the way that psychosis presents to the
Manifestations,
person.
yeah. My father was diagnosed as schizophrenic, and obviously, my family situation, and so being the bridge between those two generations, I'm trying to understand, and to find out, and to learn.
Anyone else got any questions? Or
Hands up, who's fighting the neurodivergent urge to say everything that you've ever thought, anything related to this topic?
Just really focusing on one line. There's
Yeah.
one line that was, you said, I've learned to coexist with myself.
I
Yeah.
love that
Yeah,
line.
and it's just repeat, I'm just loving it.
That's a lovely
yeah,
line. Oh my God,
I
that's
think
beautiful.
coexistence is. I think a lot of the time we're taught that recovery means not having the bad thing happen anymore.
Yeah.
But I'm schizophrenic and I'm nearly 9 years sober from drug addiction. My experience is that those things don't disappear. You learn to live with them. So my addiction, I don't actively use anymore, but I'm still an addict and I still deal with a brain that wants to do that.
Yeah.
I've just learned to coexist with that, and it bothers me less because I'm not constantly fighting with myself. And it's the same for me with being schizophrenic. For the most part, I've just learned to live with that aspect of myself. It's only when things get really bad and I lose touch with reality that perhaps that coexistence becomes a little unbalanced. I think a lot of autistic people are raised to be in a constant fight with themselves.
Yes.
Everything we're taught by society is that there's something wrong with us, we're inappropriate, we don't understand things, we could do this better, we could do that better.
Stop being so sensitive.
I think, and maybe this touches on the question you asked earlier, one of the most helpful things I did for myself was learning just to meet myself where I was and stop trying to live by other people's standards. But yeah, unless anyone's got any more questions, I think, books, A Guide to Autism and Psychosis is available for £20. I do take cards. I have my other books which are cheaper as well, if you're so inclined, and I'm happy to sign books and sell those to people, so thank you.